in Pune as a faculty in January 2011. He retired from ICER Pune at the end of 2016. He has made significant contribution to linguistic theory in the areas of phonology, syntax, and morphology. Along with Tara Mohanan, he was the architect of an inquiry-oriented undergraduate program in linguistics at the National University of Singapore. His more recent academic interests include scientific inquiry and the nature of academic knowledge and inquiry in general against the backdrop of human beliefs.
Thank you for that kind introduction. There have been various discussions on the need for better teachers, the need for technology, and so on. And I would like to begin by identifying what I think are the greatest obstacles to meaningful education. And what I mean by meaningful education, I will outline in a few moments. I think the greatest obstacles to meaningful education are, number one, our testing system, the competitive exams and so on, which have come up during the last 20 years, in which students answer questions, multiple choice questions, in 2 minutes. Okay? If you answer a question in 2 minutes, you don't have the time to look at the question and say, that's an interesting question, let me think. Any student who dares to do that is bound to fail. And along with that, also the teacher eligibility test, in which multiple choice questions have to be answered in 1 minute. It is guaranteed to destroy all forms of thinking. This is the first obstacle, and we have no power to change that. We have to work with that system and try to do something in spite of the attempt to destroy students' thinking abilities. The second obstacle to meaningful education, as I see it, is the syllabus design. When you design a syllabus, you have to ask, what is the purpose of education? What goals should we pursue? This question came up in the panel discussion earlier. Why do we educate our children? What do we want them to learn? These questions are hardly ever asked. Our syllabus design follows some kind of tradition. It existed 5 years ago, so we must continue. If you could throw out about 80% of what exists in the syllabi, our education would be much better. But then teachers are forced to teach students to do well in exams and to so-called cover the syllabus. Teachers have no possibility of changing anything because of the system. The third is, in order to provide meaningful education, teachers need to learn. A teacher who is not a learner becomes not pretty good at teaching after some time. Our system, I have been interacting with teachers in schools for the last 10 years, and my experience has been that teachers do not have time to learn. If teachers are not given time to learn, then obviously you can't expect anything from teachers. So that's the third greatest obstacle. And of course, I could also add the craze for education to get better salaries. But I will ignore that part. How do we change that? I think the only solution is to work not within the system, but in spite of the system. I'm hoping that a few people would be committed to helping learners learn something meaningful. Very small number, that should be sufficient. And the ThinQ.education that you see there is part of that enterprise to work outside of the system to bring about a change that we hope might happen, if you are lucky, a few decades from now, maybe about 50 years from now. Okay, so with that introduction, let me invite you to imagine a world, maybe 50 years from now, where resources are plentiful. Nobody has any problems with money. Humans work because they enjoy working. Learning is open to everybody. No fee. Education is completely free. And teachers or college professors do not give grades. And there is no certification. Incidentally, this is not an impossibility. I teach a course at ISER in which there are no exams, no grades. It is not for credit. And only those students who want to learn, this is an introduction to research, only those students who want to learn come. And I really enjoy teaching that course. And there are students from first year to PhD coming to my class, outside of the regular curriculum. Both students and the teacher enjoy that. It is possible to do that for the entire education system. And if that were possible, let us say 50 years from now, I would like to invite you to ask this question. The question was asked during the panel discussion earlier, and the question was, what is the purpose of education? In a world of this kind that I'm describing, what would be the purpose of education in that world? Why do we send our children to schools? If they don't have to make a living, they don't have to find a job, they don't have to find employment, all that is well taken care of, what would education do? Notice that this was the case long ago. During the Gurukula system, the gurus did not train students to find jobs. They helped learners to become educated. So I'm kind of going back to that idea that there is more to education than finding jobs. And once you answer that question to yourself, education, meaningful education that goes beyond immediate salaries and career prospects and fame and so on, then the question would be, how can Education 5, what I mean by Education 5.0, I'll make clear in a moment, how can that happen? This is roughly the question I want to raise. So the structure of this talk will be something like this. I'll first talk about Education 4.0 to Education 5.0. Education 4.0 is the talk of the current education enterprise. What it means is education to help industries find employees. And Education 5.0 is the other meaningful education that I was talking about. And I would define Education 5.5 in terms of, as at least one of the parts of that is what I would call academic intelligence, as opposed to knowledge. Education that enhances our intelligence. And then I'll go through a few examples of activities that can enhance academic intelligence. And then I'll come back to Education 5.0 and will briefly describe what some of us are trying to do to make that happen. I forgot to give you the slide stuff. Okay. And the THINQ, pronounced think, not ThinQ, is trying to move learners to that path. That's roughly the structure of this talk. Okay, so very briefly, Education 4.0, if you haven't heard about it, it's you will find it all over the internet. It's connected to Industry 4.0, and that has come from the what is called the fourth industrial revolution. The first industrial revolution started with mechanical machines, for example, steam engine, and run by coal, and motor cars and so on. That was the first industrial revolution. And the second industrial revolution was electricity. The third was the IT, and the fourth is currently the second stage of the computing-based industry, information technology that comes with artificial intelligence, machine learning, big data, and so on. And education has been trying to keep up with those industrial revolutions. And they talk about better prepared workforce and greater employability for students, and also talk about better preparation for future. I would like to focus on that one. Better preparation for future need not necessarily mean better preparation for work or what the employer needs, but better preparation for the student's life after education, and better preparation for a better world. Education for a better world 50 years from now. What would that look like? And it also talks about better return expectation for the people who are investing. And I would rephrase that as educators investing their time and effort on student learning. Their return is valuable student learning, not the workforce. And that makes a slight difference. Not just a slight difference, but important difference. So if you move from education 4.0 of that type to what I call education 5.0. Education 5.0 is a term that does not exist on the internet, but this is something that I would like to see existing on the internet. It's a dream. And that has better future-oriented education, or education oriented towards a better future for the learner and for the world in general. It is not economy-oriented, but it will include economy as one of its components. And it comes from actually the National Education Policy 2019. And it says, let me quote, students must develop not only cognitive skills, not this kind of soft skills and so on that we have been talking about, but foundational skills of literacy and numeracy, and they emphasize higher order cognitive skills, such as critical thinking and problem-solving skills, but also social and emotional skills, also referred to as soft skills, including cultural awareness, empathy, perseverance and grit, teamwork, and leadership, among others. They provide the same kind of dream that I've been pointing to. Incidentally, most of these slides are there in your package. There is a 2-page handout. They don't contain all the slides, but most important ones. This slide is definitely part of that handout. So you don't need to make notes. It's there if you want to ask questions later. So this is Education 5. So this is education that aims at higher order cognition. What does that mean? Higher order cognition and also socio-emotional. Socio-emotional skills means managing things like anger, getting rid of stress, not being hateful, and so on, and communicating with other human beings. Those are the kinds of things that we aim at, but those things also help industry to do better. Creativity, critical thinking are important for not only for personal life, but also for industry. Not only for research, but in innovation. So this is what NEP 2019 calls higher order cognition, and I would like to call it academic intelligence. So the question is, what does it mean to say academic intelligence? Well, let me define academic intelligence as, first of all, let me define intelligence. What does it mean? Intelligence is not something that you're born with alone, but intelligence is the capacity to do things with the mind. And our capacity to do things with the mind is like the capacity to do things with the body. Our strength, ability, agility, speed, etc., the ability to lift things, the ability to run, come with practice, good nutrition, and exercise. Exactly the same thing with intelligence. Intelligence increases on the basis of what we do with our mind. Good nutrition for the mind and good practices for the mind. And academic intelligence is part of that intelligence, the kind of intelligence that we receive by engaging with academic knowledge, by acquiring knowledge, by constructing knowledge, by evaluating knowledge, and so on. So this is very similar to physical fitness, but something that we can develop through mental nutrition and mental practice. That's what I mean by academic intelligence, that intelligence that comes with academic knowledge. Not learning of academic knowledge alone, but also doing other things with it. So some of the things of academic intelligence include the capacity to do things with one's mind, as I mentioned, and the body of knowledge transmitted through formal education. I'm sorry, there is a slight mismatch between what I'm saying and the slides. I hope you will excuse me. I'm trying to juggle with this and that. Okay, so the practice of acquiring academic knowledge is one. Solving problems of academic knowledge is another. Constructing academic knowledge, by just what I mean to say is creating academic knowledge. Students in general are not expected to do that, but it can be done in the secondary school. We have tried it, and it has been very successful. I'll give you some examples very soon. Thinking critically about academic knowledge, justifying claims of academic knowledge, and communicating all of the above. What I have given there in bullet points may be simply words. I understand that. I'm just putting those words in. Those words become meaningful only after we go through a few examples. So you have to bear with me with just these words. So let me begin. All this was by way of a broad introduction. The real talk begins now with concrete examples. So first example. We learned this word straight line in our primary school, and the textbooks, I don't remember exactly what I learned, the definition of straight line that you learned, but anyway, it's possible to define a straight line as a trajectory of a point. Imagine a point moving, and if that moving point does not change its direction, it continues along the same direction, that's a straight line. All right? So let's define a straight line like that. We don't need anything beyond what you learned in primary school to think through this example. Next, there is a certain assumption that the geometry that we learned in primary school, it is what is called Euclidean geometry. There are many other geometries available, but they don't teach these things in the school, secondary school. Euclidean geometry makes the following assumption, that is, no straight line, no matter how extended, can meet itself. So if you draw a straight line, it will continue in the same direction. It will not come back to itself. That's an assumption in Euclidean geometry, and we kind of take it for granted. Now, Euclidean geometry is a geometry of flat surfaces. So if you draw a straight line on a flat table, no matter how big the table, we know that the straight line will not come back to itself. But now imagine not a flat surface, but a spherical surface. What will happen if you draw a straight line? Straight line meaning a line that does not change its direction. Do that in your mind. Will it come back to itself? Okay, that's an interesting contrast, right? A straight line that looks like it is a circle, but it is not it is a circle in one sense, but it is also a straight line that comes back to itself. This is a straight line on a spherical surface. Now, why is this interesting? It's interesting because spherical geometry, that is, geometry of spherical surfaces, was the starting point for Einstein's theory of relativity. This is the best way to introduce relativity to secondary school students. They can imagine this. This is, I called it a thought experiment because it's an experiment done in your mind, not physical experiment, not experiment done with your hands. So that's a different assumption. So that's the assumption, that the change assumption. Every straight line, when extended, will meet itself. What are the logical consequences of that assumption? In mathematics, logical consequences are called theorems. When you change an assumption, it'll have some consequences. These are called theorems. Conjectures, when proved, become theorems. What are the theorems? Let me ask you this question. In Euclidean geometry, flat geometry, no two straight lines can intersect more than once. It is impossible for two straight lines to intersect twice. In the other geometry, is that true? What do you think? So people who say yes, raise your hands. People who say no, raise your hands. People who say yes, can you raise your hands? Can a straight line intersect another straight line twice in two distinct points? Yeah, there are a few people who raise your hands, a few over there, and others might, if you think a little more. This is unfair to ask you this question and expect an answer in 2 minutes. This is like multiple choice questions for competitive exams. I know that's not fair, but think about it at home. And if you think about it at home, you're going to learn something. You're going to learn something by engaging with the question, not by learning it from a textbook. I'm only asking you a question. And I'm not going to give you an answer. Okay, that's one. Second question. In secondary school, we learned that, that a triangle can have at most one right angle. Can you have a triangle in which there are two right angles or three right angles? Obviously, no. Right? Of course, I would also invite you to prove that idea. How will you prove that no triangle can have more than one right angle? Okay, I leave you with that question. No answers. You can work it out at home when you're falling asleep, when you're riding a bicycle. So obviously, you can't have three right angles in a triangle. What about spherical geometry? In a spherical geometry, can you have three right angles in a triangle? Okay, this is going to make you uncomfortable. Because implicit in my question is the idea, maybe it is possible, but I'm not telling you maybe it is not possible. And I'm not going to give you an answer. From that discomfort, by engaging with your discomfort outside of the classroom, comes learning. And it is possible for students to do that. These are questions that secondary school students can engage with if you give them the opportunity. It's a very different kind of learning. And by doing so, students are learning how to construct mathematics, not simply get the knowledge from a textbook, but they become mathematicians themselves. And this is not far-fetched. I have seen students doing it. They become mathematicians. Even the students who think they are afraid of mathematics, they hate mathematics, if you ask them to think and give them an opportunity to think, they begin to want more and more mathematics. I assure you that in a class of 100 students, if you do math education this way, more than 80% of them will become addicts to mathematics. They will come to you for saying, please give us more of this kind of stuff. This is really like eating kulfi. Okay? So this is just one example. That was a thought experiment. I hope you will remind me, I may not be good at time, I hope somebody will remind me if it is close to about 30 minutes so that I can skip some slides. Okay. A real experiment is not, thought experiments are possible in mathematics and in philosophy, and also to think through certain issues in science, but in science, we have to do real experiments. So let me give an example of a real experiment. Here is a question. A knowledge claim is one that you claim is true. And here is what you claim. Drinking tulsi tea 3 times a day cures common cold. Okay, suppose your grandmother said this, and you say, is that true? How will you design an experiment to test your grandmother's claim? You have to design an experiment. Okay? Now, I'm emphasizing this because in our system of education, whether in school or college, students are taught how to implement experiments. So when I did my undergraduate degree in physics quite some time ago, I was asked to go to a lab and go through some procedures. I was given some vernier calipers and I was asked to measure. I was asked to do this. I had no idea why I was doing it. I did not know that I was learning how to implement experiments. Okay, I was also asked to write reports. So what I did was I figured out what the correct answer was from a textbook and worked backwards to cook up results. I didn't go to the lab. I did all the lab work outside of the lab and submitted the stuff and managed without ever going to a lab. Because I didn't find the meaning of doing that. Nobody taught me how to design an experiment. That would have been great. So think about this. This is not an easy experiment because, let me give you a couple of clues. Common cold is something that, suppose you discover you drink tulsi tea and your cold is cured in about 2 or 3 days. How do you know that tulsi tea was the cause that cured the cold? The cause could have been something else. You have designed your experiment in such a way that other interpretations are ruled out. This is an excellent question to get the students learn how to design experiment. You don't have to go to a lab to learn to design experiments. It can be done in the classroom, lying in bed, while talking to a friend, riding a bicycle. These are forms of learning that can happen, that can give you meaningful learning. One more example. I asked a similar question, but this is slightly different. You know what a straight angle triangle is. A straight angle triangle is a triangle in which one of the angles is 180 degrees. Can't, right? What if I were to tell you that I can prove it? I can prove that straight angle triangles can exist. You might think I am crazy, but if I give you the proof, you'll say, oh, yes, of course. What I need to do to prove that straight angle triangles exist is to adopt the following strategy. First, define angle, define straight angle, and most importantly, define triangle. Now, what I can do, I'm not going to do this here because I want to make you uncomfortable. What I can do is define triangle in a certain way such that I can prove that straight angle triangles do exist. And then define triangles in a different way to prove that straight angle triangles cannot exist. And if I give you the two definitions, you would think, yeah, both are okay. But there are important distinctions. One proves that straight angles triangles cannot exist. Other will prove that straight angle triangles do exist. Now, this is something great to give to secondary school students. These are the kinds of things that will make them addicted to learning. So since my intention is to get you addicted to it, I can't give you the answers because once you get the answers, the fun is gone. Pardon me? That must be? Yeah, the suspense is gone, exactly. And also, the learning activity of the mind disappears. So I cannot afford to do that. I can discuss the answers when the students come up with answers, not before that. Okay, so I leave you with that. How much time do I have? 5 minutes. Okay. So what I'm going to do is to skip very quickly. Let me say, you know that an inanimate thing, if you drop an inanimate thing, for example, like a stone, the stone will come down in a straight line. If you keep a stone on a table, it will not move. But if you keep a mouse on a table, the mouse will move after some time. It will not be there on the table. Likewise, if you drop a butterfly, butterfly will not come down in a straight line. It will go in a random path. So you could say an inanimate object is something that cannot move on its own. An animate entity is something that moves on its own. That looks like a good definition of inanimate versus animate. Okay. How about this? And you can say biology is concerned with animate things, and this distinction is important. Now consider this. What is an inanimate entity, or what is an animate entity? Consider the following things. Is seed animate or inanimate? Is An unripe banana, animate or inanimate? Is the body of a clinically dead person, but not fully dead? Is that animate or inanimate? Instead of clinically dead, you could say completely paralyzed, unmoving. The heart stored in a hospital, is that animate or inanimate? I can see that it is already beginning to bother you. Very good. So that's... you have been told, ancient authorities tell us that water is an element and air is an element. And gold is not an element. That's what ancient authorities, both in Greece and India, tell us. But the textbooks tell us the opposite, that water is a compound, air is a mixture, gold is an element. What are the reasons for believing these? And why should we choose one authority over the other? What should you choose to believe? Given two conflicting authorities, what do we do? Again, something disturbing. Okay? I love to see the expressions when you see these questions, and you will have exactly the same response from your students. Okay, so I'm going to skip, since I briefly mentioned what Education 5 is and what academic intelligence is, I'm going to skip these slides. You have it in your handout, so let's ignore those things. And you can read all those things from your handout. Let me briefly say what this thing called ThinQ is. ThinQ is trying to do the kinds of things that I've been trying to illustrate. This is going to be an alternative to mainstream education. Hopefully, someday, 50 years from now, what we are trying to do will become mainstream education. Syllabus designers might decide, oh, this is a good thing. Let all students learn this. And exam questions will be designed in such a way that it will test the kinds of learning abilities that we are trying to promote. Not the current system, but a different kind of system for a dream world. And we offer online courses. We don't work with schools unless the schools are willing to spend at least 2 hours a week to do something different. Something different from training students to answer exam questions. We do workshops for whoever wants to learn. We would do workshops for teachers, for students. And if you want to know more about the kind of stuff that we do, we have a workshop for this group on Sunday. So do attend that workshop. So let me also briefly say the organization or the collective called ThinQ stands for developing three capacities in learners. One is thinking, the other is inquiring, and the third is questioning. And it is built on 3 pillars: inquiry, integration, and deep understanding. These are just words. If you want to understand what these words mean, you have to go to our website, and the website is given in the handout. Let me briefly acknowledge my ancestors, the people who helped us to be who we are, at least in my own personal growth, my gurus, my lineage, and so on. One is my father. He died quite some time ago. The second, 2 of my teachers, my mentor, N.S. Prabhu, who is still alive, and another teacher, M.V. Natkarni, who died a few years ago. Then the person with the beard on the top right photograph is my PhD advisor, Professor Maurice Haller. And the young person who is standing next to him is me, was me several years ago. In the next photograph, the person on the right is Professor Noam Chomsky. And again, the bearded person was me at the same time. The lines are kind of missing. What Chomsky is saying is, dissent is the soul of inquiry and discovery. So these are the people from whom I learned how to think. I learned how to inquire. I learned how to educate myself.
Finally, another inspiration, the late MIT professor Ken Hale, a very special person. He was the source of the idea that the best form of education is one in which students grow intellectually, not by passively receiving knowledge, but by constructing the knowledge that we want them to have. And I have followed that idea ever since in my work over the past 40 years.
So I would like to thank the organizers and who invited me to this talk. And of course, I would also like to thank all of you for patiently listening to me. Thank you.